At the outset of this workshop, I just want to give a general overview that what I've tried to do throughout these pages, and I'm talking specifically about the fact sheet that has been sent through to everyone, is provide a summary of all of the legislative changes and includes throughout further links and references on additional information. So just like you, I'm coming at this not as an expert, but as a participant and someone working in advocacy. I'm hoping that this workshop format is an opportunity for us to look at these changes and discuss what they mean and how they might affect the supports we utilise. So in the first paragraph, I've given some context. This relates to the independent NDIS review that happened throughout 2023 and the recommendations given. What I haven't said, and I don't want to be controversial in any way, but in part, this also relates to the sustainability of the NDIS and concerns chiefly expressed through the government of increasing costs. So I guess we want to bear all of this in mind as we work through these changes. So at the outset, I've given links to 4 references in the fact sheet. Obviously, the most important is the NDIS Act. If you click the link, it gives you options to download it as a PDF or Word file. I find it useful to keep it as a PDF. Yes, it's a long document, but it's mainly there as a reference. You can quickly scroll through to get to any section, and it's just worthwhile referring to. Not the whole thing, but just to read the wording of important sections as we work our way through these changes. The second document is just a handy frequently asked questions. And yesterday I added another link to the NDIS website, which gives some good updated information on all of the sections changed by the legislative amendments. So, it's just there for you to look at, read through, and it answers some questions if you've got any doubts. And the last reference is just a handy overview of the Justice and Equity Centre. It covers the legislative changes, but also goes into court and tribunal decisions and foundational supports. It's not a long document, so it's worthwhile having a look through as a reference. So look, I've just been rattling on myself. I might just pause at this moment. If anyone's got any thoughts, feedback, questions, anything to share before we move on, I'd love to hear it. Concerns about what's happened, or if you've got own recent experiences in dealing with these changes and the impact that's had on you. If you've got anything along those lines, please don't hesitate.
Thanks, Tony. I've had the review and now I'm just waiting for another follow-up phone call from the agency to say we're just going to reassess it. I've heard the stories in my own circles that possibly will happen. Have you heard anything like that? The plan's rolled over, but then they've had a review from a LAC point saying that, hey, we're going to review your plan, and that's when they've gone through and done dramatic cuts to it. Have you heard anything like that in your circles, Tony?
Yes, we've certainly got feedback that it's been affecting some people similarly. So similar experience. They're either having rollovers for a further year, but not had an opportunity to chat about the changes or where the plan wasn't suitable to make adjustments. So yeah, there's been a lot of feedback on that. And there has certainly been some along similar lines to what you're experiencing. So yeah, I mean, are you saying then that that they have at least they've consulted you and they're going to come back with further info, or before you get a new plan issued?
I had to do all the legwork myself, heavy
Right.
lifting with my support coordinator to make it happen. And there's, the future long and short term goals, which
Yeah.
no longer relate to me, but the plan's been rolling over since 2023. So I've got my short and long term goals set up, but there's been no direct contact from the agency. It's just been, no, we'll roll it over and we'll get back to you shortly.
Right. So, and by that, usually that means the rollover is with exactly the same supports that you are currently receiving, but just extended for a further 12 months.
Yes, sir,
Yeah,
that's correct.
yeah, that happened to me last August as well, so I had the same experience. But thankfully for me, my plan was fine, so it's not an issue for me. But we've had lots of anecdotal feedback that it's affected lots of people where their plans weren't fit for purpose, but they've not had an opportunity
Mm,
to make any additional changes. Yeah, so this is a new section of the Act. It gives the definition of what is an NDIS support and also what is not an NDIS support. With these lists, the NDIS is attempting to put clearer definitions on what an NDIS support is. This is where there is likely to be some conjecture on these definitions. But as anyone that has had previous experience with the NDIS, there is likely to be conjecture, debate, and arguments with them on these definitions. Just to think of one example, on the list is exercise physiology and personal well-being activities. So it covers support for these activities, but what about general gym membership as an example? And this has come up many times in the past and is likely to again. I might just quickly mention replacement rules as well. It's also an area that's going to get lots of focus. Do we want to chat about this section? Yeah, and get some feedback on people's views on this, or even on the lists and what's not on the list. Any of those areas has anyone got any comments or feedback or thoughts they want to share on this?
We've had quite a few clients that have had therapy in their budgets for equine therapy or music therapy or therapies of that nature that are not defined. And I think it's just in the new terminology. So they're losing current therapy supports because they're not defined. So anybody with therapies that really relate to, and it seems to be adults with autism and that type of disability that's being mostly affected in that space. I don't know about a lot of other types of disability, whether it's quite specific to that type of therapy, but they've lost them just across the board. And they have to be defined back into that by an OT or a psych or whatever. So I think it's just a change that's taken place without a lot of, I get it, like just carte blanche across the board that'll have to be reinstated. I guess that's the transitional period that is causing a lot of angst out in the world. From where we sit, that's what it looks like. It looks like if it's should be in your plan, it needs to be defined rather than just a broad therapy sort of situation. That's all.
Right. So as a stated support, as an example.
Yes, as a stated support, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's I would imagine there's probably many people experiencing that. But yeah, good feedback. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, hi. My name's Katrina Ford, and I've just joined SCIA.
Yeah,
my
hi,
issue.
Katrina.
Hi, how are you again?
You were in the
my
forum
issue.
2 weeks ago.
Yes, I remember, and I raised this then. I think.
Yeah.
around short-term accommodation / respite, where the focus seems to be now on providing respite for the informal supports as opposed to providing it for the person with a disability. So directly impacted is myself that uses Sargood on Collaroy, a specialised retreat for people with spinal injuries. Basically, my friend who is married can go and use it, but me, who is unmarried and has no informal supports, can't use it. And I have spoken to Dana about looking at doing a discrimination claim based on marital status around this issue, which I think it's kind of worthwhile exploring more.
Yeah. Look, I suppose I'm guessing the agency's tightening the eligibility around short-term accommodation. And from that perspective, they want to remove the accommodation element for those that are already receiving in care, formal in care on a daily basis. And that seems to be what the shift is. Yeah, and I guess we don't have an answer for that other than to say that this is likely to pop up again and again because of these tightened restrictions that weren't there beforehand. I mean, I know I've stayed at Sargood myself, and I don't have any informal supports. Yeah, I rely on support workers coming into my home every day. But I guess it's a valid
Well, that's the
argument.
other element is if your and they do, I have 2 support workers. I have minimal hours available in the morning. I can't have more than 2. And when they take annual leave, what am I supposed to do? And I raised this at the Dana team's meeting, and there really wasn't an answer. He fluffed around in circles and didn't give an answer because there really isn't an answer to that.
Well, there kind of is, and I'm not trying to be controversial, but just let me play devil's advocate for a moment. The agency's response to that would be that you need to do contingency planning and prepare for people's annual leave. So their argument might be that, well, enlist for further workers or try to actually get some for the times that they're.
You
I'm
need
not
the
saying
funding for that, and you need to be able to plan for that as well, and he raised looking at your capacity building funding to support doing that, which I don't think would apply. I don't know. But yeah, that's fine. But without notice, it's very hard to just round up the extra funding to get another support worker in to train and then to keep them there, to be interested, to want to maintain the work.
Yeah.
2 hours in the morning isn't a lot.
No.
To spread out, So there is that.
Are they giving you notice when they're going on leave?
Yeah, of course. And you try and get the support workers, and I use Fire Up and Mabel, and you win some and you lose some, and it takes time and money to do that.
Sure. Look, it's a valid argument, and particularly for those that are living in areas, in regional areas where you don't have access to the sort of supports that you get in metropolitan areas. So, look, I get it. It's not easy to try and arrange that. So, yeah, fair enough. I guess as a last comment, that this may well be some further advocacy in this regard along the lines that you've spoken about, because, I guess the other argument is people should be entitled to go on a holiday from time to time, and places like Sargood are the perfect place to be able to do that, where you've got access to all the 24-hour care. And yeah.
Tony, before you do, Trix has also said something in the chat. It feels like explicit scrutiny for illegitimate, clearly inappropriate support claims has jeopardized people's supports as they're already and always doing the right thing. They should have addressed explicitly what's been wrong and give more resources to the Commission, not making things harder for those just fine and doing just fine and have to justify themselves every year.
Yeah, definitely valid argument. That seems to be an ongoing issue, even now with all of these changes, particularly around reassessment and people being reassessed when they've been in the scheme and previously their disability has been recognised as permanent. So yeah, definitely a very valid comment. Okay, so not a great deal to say in section 21, but it's just more clearly delineating between accessing under disability requirements and early intervention requirements. In the fact sheet, you'll see a link which takes you to the NDIS website and information on applying. There you can download a comprehensive guideline on describing the differences when applying. And I've just put in there sections 24 and 25 regarding the new amendments, specify that an NDIS support must meet the new definitions in section 10. So, you know, that's not a lot has changed in those sections, but they are, I guess, reiterating that the supports that you are now receiving have to be in line with the section 10 and those new definitions. So it's really just to highlight that. Section 30 and the agency requesting specific information. I might just read that bit. The NDIA can request specific information or require you do certain things like undergo an assessment if they are considering revoking your status as a participant. If you do not comply within a reasonable time, the NDIA may revoke your access to the NDIS. So this link is a general fact sheet giving an overview of the summary of most of the significant changes, including section 30. So in the fact sheet, you'll see that link, and it's just a handy fact sheet covering some of those areas. The fact sheet is intended to provide a quick reference guide to how changes made by the NDIS Act, the new Amendment Act, will impact on matters relating to the NDIS currently before the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, now the Administrative Review Tribunal. I've included it here because it gives some important information on section 30, as well as giving further details on some of the other changes. In the workshop 1 fact sheet, you'll notice that I have quoted a reference from the Disability Service Consulting Group and linked to their information on this, as it gives a good overview of an explanation on this change. So if you've gone through that fact sheet, it's just a handy link. It gives a good explanation of these changes. And yeah, so that's the main reason why I put it there. You'll notice too that I used their information on explaining the different time frames getting information back to the agency. They have made some recent changes to that, and they're now allowing 90 days. And I just was going to say that a decision to revoke a participant status under section 30 is and will continue to be a reviewable decision. Not that that's much comfort to anyone. So before moving on to the next section, it's worth mentioning that there has been some advocacy advanced regarding the timeframes, the information back to the NDIS. In the fact sheet, I have linked with an important statement from DANA. DANA is the Disability Advocacy Network Australia. They're the peak, the national peak for advocacy organisations to allow greater times. So confirming the 90 days. In that statement, they also discuss the importance of outlining the information required from the NDIA. Should be more precise or enlightening, so that participants have a better idea of the information they need to gather. And I guess that aligns with what Trix said about, when the agency is contacting you and then being rather vague about what information they're requiring, that they need to be much clearer so participants have a better idea of the information being sought. And that's been a major issue so far. Any thoughts or comments before I go to the next slide?
I think the biggest issue for me would be the assessment staff themselves and how well they're informed about the changes. That's the concern I would have.
Yeah. This section on eligibility reassessments, as well as the previous section on information gathering powers, is probably one of the most controversial, at least in terms of negative feedback in the media. There has been a fair amount of media covering this. Dana's statement raises a further issue. That's that link I mentioned in the previous slide, that relates to participants that have transitioned from state-funded disability services when the NDIS first rolled out, region by region, and I would include myself in that category. What information was shared by those government agencies? Noting that at the time, certain disability groups met the Category A lists, and therefore those cohorts may have entered without detailed information about functional impairment, unless subsequently having had one completed as a participant. So I've given a link as well to that Category A list that were originally used there and not used now. So there were a lot of people that were on state-funded programs. So in New South Wales, it used to be called attending care, now called, and then it was merged across to community support program, and that was before the NDIS rolled out. And I do remember at the time that the agency that was responsible for those services in New South Wales, the information that was passed on to the NDIS was sometimes not complete. So, and Dana has just referenced in that statement that this may potentially be an issue for those that moved into the scheme from those state-funded programs. So I just merely put that there as a comment. I don't mean to alarm anyone. It may not be an issue at all for anyone. I just mainly want to point out that should you be in a circumstance of undergoing an eligibility reassessment, or for that matter, any other reason, it'll be helpful to understand the information that the NDIS holds on you. Then you can know what information is missing, potentially. So that's why I've put information on the last page of the fact sheet on participant information access, should you ever have the need to get further details. This is a good tool to utilise. So yeah, just on that last page of the fact sheet, I've just put a bit of information and a link to participant information access. So you can request information about your access to the NDIS or your NDIS plan or plan reassessment rather. If you are requesting information about your access to the NDIS, they can provide you with your access request form, evidence of disability, supporting evidence form, access decision, and reasons for your access decision. In truth, there isn't a huge amount of information, and we don't really know the implications of that, so completely understandable. So I'll just talk now about this section, Section 32BA, impairment notices. So as you can see, there are 6 areas: intellectual, cognitive, sensory, neurological, physical, impairments relating to psychosocial disability. People with a spinal cord injury should come under neurological and physical. There was a NDIS forum some weeks ago that went over this issue in a very general way, and they did give one example, which was handy, and it was someone with a spinal cord injury. And so they were listed under sensory and physical. So I guess moving forward for those with spinal cord injury, yeah, we want to make sure that you come in under both those impairment categories. The quote is taken from the NDIS review final report, which I made a footnote of in the fact sheet. I've made a point of referring this and recommendation 3 from the review just to give some context about what they were proposing. They go into some detail about what they envisage as being an appropriate needs assessment. Just from the review, it talks about developing a more comprehensive understanding of a person's circumstance, including reviewing information from treating professionals. And this is a quote: "The person leading the assessment will be the person agreeing NDIS budget with the participant. They should be an agent or employee of the NDIA with a high level expertise in disability and spend sufficient time with participants so they feel heard." So that's what they're proposing. I guess the concern is for all of us is, will that be heeded, and will it be as comprehensive as what the review is asking for?
Yeah, I was wondering, and then what actions you can take if it's not comprehensive in a way that it should be. And I also encourage people, if they have experiences, to share them with us, because we can't advocate for you if you don't, not necessarily in here, but in the future as well.
One further thing I will say is the NDIA and DSS, that's the Department of Social Services, had promised that this assessment process will be co-designed with people with disability, but they do seem to be in a rush with this. They've already put out a tender for the needs assessments. So yeah, it's a concern. And just in response to what Susie said, just at the bottom, I have said that a provision of notice is not a reviewable decision. However, a participant may request to vary that notice. So just in the previous example with spinal cord injury, if you find that you've only been listed under, say, neurological or physical, a decision to vary or not to vary the participant notice is a reviewable decision. What I will say around that assessment, the needs assessment, I do go into more detail on that in the second workshop. The information available does suggest that there will be circumstances where they will recognise the need to do a follow-up reassessment if there's been errors to such a degree where either the budget's not been worked out appropriately or if it related to the impairment. But of course, we don't know that. That's just purely speculation at this stage. So it's very much a watch this space. And from our perspective, and well, from everyone's perspective, I guess the thing to say is when they start to consult on this issue, it'll be important for us all to be aware of that and provide as much feedback as we can, just so that we get some input into what these needs assessments are likely to look like, because it's certainly an issue in the aged care sector at the moment, and they've replaced their old assessment process to a single assessment, and that's had some negative impacts for aged care. So I just merely make a point of that. I don't want to alarm anyone on that issue. Donna.
I'm just really interested to know whether number one, the needs assessment, whether it can come out of an existing plan, because if you're being asked to provide information and further reports and proof of functional impairments that may not have been provided originally because you had a diagnosis of something and it was based on diagnosis as opposed to functional assessments, there's so much involved in that process to actually prove one thing versus the other. First of all, it needs to be able to be coming out of a plan that exists. And I guess secondly is 90 days. I know that they've said it's 90 days, but if you're in a regional area, you might not be able to see a psych or however they look at it in 90 days and get a report. So even that might be too short a time frame. Now, the NDIA or NDIS put timeframes on their own reportability back to participants, and yet theirs blow out by 3 months or 5 months or 6 months, and yet there's no consequence to that. So should there be also the ability to respond in a way to say, well, you haven't met, like, we can't meet the target, we need a variation on that. And then there's a third part to it, which is the ART process, that they're not going to allow a reviewable decision on this, which again is kind of, is that only on requesting the reassessment, or actually on the outcome of the reassessment? Because you're basically being kicked out if that's the case, and that should be ART reviewable. And then on top of that, that's an extra layer of complexity for advocates that will be underfunded, because they don't want anybody to be able to, well, it seems like that part of the sector becomes very difficult to be able to supply an advocate to anybody that has great need, and there's only like 20% advocacy support at the ART because of the lack of people with the funding the way it sits. So there's lots of layers to that, I guess, and I'm just very concerned that it becomes about time frames, and in regional areas that might be really, really problematic.
Just in answer to your question, so there is a difference, say, between this new needs assessment, which everyone will undergo once that's up and running. That will kick in when a plan reassessment is up. So
right, so everybody gets one.
So everyone will be getting one. Yes. Related to the previous slide on that, where some people are having reassessments done outside of those timeframes, and you're right about that 90-day turnaround. The agency has said that they would look at that on individual cases if people needed 90 days, and everything you said, Donna, is completely valid, particularly for those in regional areas. Getting access to allied health is already an issue with big delays. So the only thing they've said is that they would extend the 90 days based on individual circumstance. But yeah, it's definitely a legitimate concern to have. And there was one other thing that you raised.
Oh, just the, if it's reviewable, not being reviewable, just, I didn't realise that they were going to do a reassessment on everybody. So, I mean,
they won't be reassessing on everyone, but when they roll out the needs assessment,
the needs assessment.
Yeah.
And that relates directly to functional impairment as opposed to disability type and what have you. So that actually might be a really positive thing, because there's a lot of people that have comorbidities that are in for one disability that actually have 5 other things that create a greater need than what is currently being funded in their plan.
Exactly. The whole idea of the impairment is to recognise what is the level of functional impairment. And I quoted that section in the previous slide, which talks specifically about their reasoning. And here too, access to NDIS should be based first and foremost on significant functional impairment and need, and only secondly on medical diagnosis. A focus on functional impairment will enable multiple disabilities to be considered, which, when taken together, results in significant functional impairment. So that quote is from the NDIS review. So, I mean, I guess at this stage we have to take that at face value and hope that the agency will respond accordingly. And again, just relates to recommendation 3 of the review.
I wonder, will that wash backwards to access? Because currently access is from like your disability, and you've got to prove so many points or whatever to get access, to gain access. Whereas this is already within the you've already got a plan and they're looking at reassessment and functional impairments and what have you. I wonder whether it's going to wash back through back to access.
It does. It does.
Yeah, right. Great.
Yeah. So everyone
that'll be really positive.
Everyone that comes in from January this year is going through that new process. So recommendation 3 of the NDIS review: provide a fair and more consistent participant pathway. Action 3.1, the NDIS should introduce a more consistent, robust approach to determining eligibility for access to the NDIS based on transparent methods for assessing functional capacity. I guess that's the hope, that it will be done fairly in assessing functional capacity. Any further feedback or comments on this or anything else?
There is a comment there are 2 comments in the chat, Tony, from Mark. All of this is so bureaucratic. It seems the whole NDIS system is highly geared towards people who are highly competent at negotiating bureaucracies, which presumably is mostly people who already work in bureaucracies. And Cindy agree.
Yeah, look, completely understandable. The agency itself is a huge bureaucracy. You are navigating some quite complex information policies. So, yeah, completely valid. And it seems, I guess, from the point of view of participant, that these reforms have been underway almost since the agency started. It's been a stop-start affair. And so, unfortunately, it would seem that you almost need to be an expert in the NDIS to be able to keep pace with everything that's happened. So, yeah, and you rightly say it's a massive bureaucracy, and it's not easy for people to navigate and get their head around. I know there was another. We were going to actually talk. I know we raised the question around respite and short-term accommodation. I might just bring up the other 2 questions whilst we've got a bit of time. The question around the 12-month budget and split into monthly budgets, I might hold that one over to the next workshop. The only reason is, in that workshop, we actually cover that area with these changes. So if people don't mind being patient, we'll go through that question comprehensively in the next workshop. But Chris Brayley, you also asked about the wheelchair and who pays for what. Do we want to just quickly chat about that again and cover those issues? And it came up in the forum as those that attended that will remember. But generally speaking, the agency, the NDIS, will cover the basic level of the chair that's been scripted to you, but without the bells and whistles. But that isn't always consistent. So assuming you have a script in for a new power wheelchair, what used to be the case is they used to take, say, seat elevation as an extra that you would pay for. But I know that is more being recognised these days as an important function for your sociability, to be able to raise your chair up and down and be at eye level with other people, as well as get under different tables and desks of different heights. I know lights can be a function for an important function for wheelchair users, and some people have had lights rejected, some people have had them approved. And I guess that goes across to manual wheelchairs as well. So the general language is that they will fund the base model. Anything additional above that, you have to pay for yourself. But I think there's some movement there, and again, these are decisions that you can get reviewed, assuming people have the the patience and the time to be able to do that whilst they wait for their new chair. Well, I guess on that note, can I just say thanks again, everyone, for taking time out to participate in this forum, this workshop, sorry. It's greatly appreciated.